Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the DM's Club, a show about RPGs brought to you by Titan Bear Gaming. My name is Alex Edwards. Today's episode, we're going to be starting off our beginner's guide for going into and introducing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now you might be wondering, why do another beginner's guide for 5th edition when it's been out for a couple of years and other people have already done beginner's guides? The simple fact of the matter is that there are new players showing up all the time in the hobby. Now that we have things like Roll20, which is an internet-based tabletop gaming system, we've got Twitch.tv, we've got YouTube. There's all kinds of avenues that people have for landing on this new hobby and wondering what it's all about. Now, D&D 5th edition, this is the player handbook. It does have an introduction at the very beginning where it talks about what is D&D and how do you play, but odds are good that if you're watching this video with the intent of getting started, you don't actually have this book. So this video now is here with the intent of answering the questions, what is D&D and how do you play it? At its core, D&D and most role-playing games are about storytelling. There's no points, there's no teams involved. It's a matter of telling a story, which is a creative thing. It's an imaginative thing. Now, you can think back to when you were a child and you were playing imagination-based games or creativity-based games, and you can think about how that started to get when you brought other kids into the picture. Needless to say, it can devolve into something a little bit chaotic and messy where feelings get hurt and maybe some rocks get thrown or something along those lines. So, what does Dungeons & Dragons do? Well, as a rule set, D&D provides a level of structure to playing a group storytelling game. To play the game, every player who sits down at the table creates an adventurer. This is going to be your character that you're going to play as. You're going to speak from this character's perspective. You're going to act from this character's perspective. You're going to be viewing the world and the story through this character's eyes. And the idea is that you are going to team up with a bunch of other characters, adventurers, make a team of adventurers, and you're going to go and embark on some kind of a heroic journey. You're going to solve some kind of problem, you're going to defeat some kind of villain, something along these lines, some story that is set before you that you are the main characters for. One player has a different role than the other players. One player at the table is the Dungeon Master, or the DM, as people like to call them. The Dungeon Master's job is to set the scene, is to prepare villainous plots, is to prepare wonderful landscapes and crazy stories. You can think of it as the Dungeon Master plays the role of every other character in the story aside from yours and the other players. The Dungeon Master is going to play the role of innocent townspeople. The Dungeon Master is going to play the role of the mayor or the quest giver who's going to tell you what kinds of things you should be getting yourself about to. He's going to be playing the role of the villains. He's going to be playing the role of the monsters. He's going to be playing the role of the 5-year-old girl that just wants to chase after dandelions, and he's going to be playing the role of the 1,000-year-old dragon that's rampaging across the countryside. Another way to think of the DM is that your character is going to be taking steps through this world, and the DM's job is to insert just a little bit more storyline right underneath your character's foot as they take those steps. That's the DM's job, to feed a little bit of story one step at a time to help you as you are discovering what this story is as your character unfolds that story. Now, it's critical to understand there's no such thing as winning or losing in Dungeons & Dragons. You're not playing for points, you're not competing for some objective, and you're definitely not you versus the Dungeon Master. Everyone is there to cooperatively tell a story together. Now, this could be a little bit confusing since the Dungeon Master is going to be playing the role of your adversaries, but he's also going to be playing the role of your allies, and he's going to be playing the role of fortuitous circumstances, lucky things that happen to you, things that are going to save you as well. So it's all going to kind of zero sum at the end. What's more, since it is a storytelling game, you may not necessarily succeed at the stories that you're trying to tell. You may not actually be able to defeat the dragon. The dragon may defeat you and may continue on to change the world in some kind of significant way. That is equally as fun. This game is a matter of consequences, and it's a matter of realistic decisions. It's what makes the game feel real. It's what makes the game feel important. It's what makes the game honestly feel worth playing. And that's fine. Lean into that. All right, so let's answer the question, how do you play? In a nutshell, there is an ebb and flow in narration between the Dungeon Master and the players. The Dungeon Master usually starts the situation by narrating what kind of environment, what kind of objects, what kind of people, what kind of creatures, what are the circumstances, and what's the context that your characters find themselves in now. Usually by this point, the DM has given you some kind of information about what kind of overarching quest you're currently participating in, what kind of plot line you're trying to debunk, what kind of monster you're trying to defeat, something along these lines. The DM narrates the scene, tells you where you're at, and describes the things that are going on around you, and then it is your job as the players to then describe or narrate or speak in character about what you would like your character to do. How does your character react to the situation that the Dungeon Master prescribes to you? The Dungeon Master then describes back the effects of what's happened to your character. Dungeon Master describes a scene where you have found yourselves in a ancient wizard's tower, and there's chests all over the walls, there's a suit of armor off in the corner, and there are 3 very distinctive, very ominous-looking doors that can exit the chamber that you're currently in. One player might describe that they want to go investigate this suit of armor. Another character might say that they want to go open up one of these chests and see what kind of magical stuff they can find inside. And a different character yet may decide that they want to open up door number 3 and see what's behind it. The Dungeon Master will then, one player at a time, at his discretion, narrate what happens. You do go over to that chest and you kick it open and discover that there's 5 bats that have been sitting inside that chest sleeping this whole time, and they fly out and their wings blast you in the face as they're flying away. Or you open that door and there's an ogre inside and he clubs you in the face with a giant tree trunk. Oh no. Or the last one of going to that suit of armor, and the suit of armor comes to life and swings its sword at you. What you thought was a statue is actually an animated suit of armor. And that's how the style of play usually goes. DM narrates something, players narrate responses, DM narrates response of the world. Players narrate their response, and you kind of go with this cadence. There's a tempo that usually goes with this. Now, this is usually done in a group dynamic, a group setting, where the Dungeon Master is there, and there's the 5, 6, or 7 players that are all at the table, and everybody kind of takes turns, at their leisure. Sometimes people will say more things than someone else, but everybody kind of needs to do their best to give everybody equal opportunity. There are other circumstances where this free-form style can result in the story not being told particularly well, and when that happens, the game drops into a different kind of tempo, a different kind of cadence, and that's what's called being in the initiative system. The Dungeon Master will signal that the initiative system has begun by telling everybody to roll for initiative. We'll cover that in a later video, but basically what that means is people are now going to be going according to one person at a time, according to an order system. You'll define the order system. Andrew goes first, Stephanie goes second, William goes third, the ogre goes fourth, the vampire goes fifth, and then Frank gets to go afterwards, right? And then you'll reset the order after everybody's taken a turn. But you do this one person taking a turn at a time. This is the initiative system. Why do we drop into this? When will the Dungeon Master tell you that you are dropping into initiative? It's when the order of events matters. You're trying to do something like cast magic to kill a monster in front of you, or the monster in front of you is trying to cast magic to kill you, or you're running from a gushing flow of lava and you need to try and leap across a chasm, but it's a narrow catwalk and everybody has to go one person at a time, and whoever's going first is going to be much further away from the lava than the person going last. That might be another situation for it. In short, when things are tense, when things are dramatic, and when time really matters, the order and sequence of events really matters. That's when you drop into the initiative system. Now, the backbone of any role-playing game system are the dice that the system uses. Why dice? The simple fact is that if you were just playing a game where you could just describe anything that you wanted to do at any point, anywhere, it wouldn't be very good for building drama or building suspense. You've got to have the chance for failing at things. You have to have the chance that something may not necessarily work. And at the very least, you have to be able to compete against something to introduce a level of tension to the game. Now, Dungeons & Dragons is a D20 based game. A D20 is a dice that has 20 sides on it. It's numbered from 1 to 20. And the entire rule set for Dungeons & Dragons is built on using a 20-sided die to determine the fate of the actions that you try to take. Now, let's say that you were a Minotaur character. Big, strong bull man, big muscles, huge hulking frame. And you were going to try to do something in your game that would have a big outcome on the overarching storyline. You are finding yourself in a chamber that is slowly filling with water, and at the other side of the chamber, there is a small door that everybody could escape from if you could just break through it. Well, you're a Minotaur. You're particularly great at breaking through stuff. You're big, you're strong. Let's go try to break through this. The Dungeon Master will then say, because the outcome is uncertain and it's a significant event, roll the 20-sided die, and he'll tell you to make a check is usually the terminology for it. Some kind of a skill check or an attack roll or something like that. Don't worry, you'll pick up the terminology as we go. But he'll say to roll the 20-sided die and tell him what the final result is. Him or her, what the final result is. Now, here's how you do this. You're going to roll your 20-sided die, and then you're going to add to it some kind of modifier. This is an integer number that's going to come from your character sheet. Your character sheet has a whole bunch of numbers on it that indicate the things that you are good at and the things that you may not necessarily be good at. If you're a Minotaur, you're probably going to be good at trying to break down a little wooden door. So the modifier that you're going to add is probably going to be pretty good. It might be a 3, 4, 5, or maybe even higher, depending on the situation. Don't worry, we'll cover where all these numbers come from. Just understand that you roll the 20-sided die and you add your character's modifier to be better at this particular check to see whether or not you succeed. You then tell your Dungeon Master the total that you roll, and the Dungeon Master is going to compare it to a target number in their head. Now, you have to have a little bit of faith in your Dungeon Master that your Dungeon Master is not just trying to be a problem for you, that they're going to fairly set that target number. This is what's called the difficulty class. They're going to set the target number to determine whether or not you're going to succeed or fail. An easy skill or an easy check that you have to make might only require a number of 10. A medium one might be 15, and a super hard one might be 20. And what you're trying to do is roll the 20-sided die, add the modifier that comes from your character sheet, and then tell the DM the total. If you meet or exceed the target number that the DM has in their head, they may or may not tell you what the number is, then that determines whether or not your action succeeds. Let's say that this was a reasonably easy door to push down. That's all you would need to succeed is 10. Then that means that most of the numbers on this one, plus whatever modifier is coming from your character sheet, it's probably going to be more than 10, so your odds are really good that you're going to be able to exceed the check necessary to break down this door. Your character breaks down the door, everybody escapes from the flooding room, and everybody's happy. This is the basics of making a d20-based check. Now, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has a mechanic in it, a dice-based mechanic, a d20-based mechanic, that they're not necessarily the progenitors of this mechanic, but they use it very heavily in their game to simplify the situation that you might find your characters in. And they call this the concept of advantage versus disadvantage. Now, I just described the case where you're trying to break down a door from a flooding chamber. That's great. There's not really much going on in that situation to make it more difficult or less difficult. But let's say that you found the door and the door was waterlogged, that the wood had been splintered pretty hard. Maybe this chamber had been filling multiple times before and that you aren't the first people to find yourselves here, and that this door is particularly easy to crush. The Dungeon Master might give you what's called advantage on the check to try and break down that door. When you have advantage, what that means is when you make your 20-sided die roll, you in fact roll 2 of them, and you pick the better value of the 2 to add your modifier and then compare to the target difficulty class, the DC. That's advantage. You get to pick the better of the 2 values. Let's say that it was instead that you only found the door reasonably late into the encounter, that the room has already mostly flooded and that the door is underwater, but it's a perfectly, the wood is actually in perfectly fine shape, so the previous situation is not happening, and now it's going to be a lot harder to try and put your foot through it or try to ram your shoulder up against that door. You would then have disadvantage on the check. Now, what that means is you roll 2 dice, just like advantage, but instead of picking the better of the 2, you now have to pick the worse of the 2, which is going to drive your total further down. You can still succeed, so don't worry, disadvantage is not the end of the world, but it certainly adds a level of drama to the situation. This is what 5th edition introduces to the game, this concept of advantage versus disadvantage. The Dungeon Master will tell you if you have advantage or disadvantage on a check when they ask you to make one. And basically its intent is to try and simplify the situation that you're either finding yourself in an advantageous position or a disadvantageous position. Now, 5th edition also adds a whole bunch of other things, but you'll slowly figure those out as you go. The purpose of this video is just to give you a primer so that you can go to a table that you can start playing at, and you can feel that you have a level of confidence before you begin. Now, for the next video that we're going to be doing, it's going to be on making a character, which is the next and last step that you need to actually sit down and start playing. So go ahead and look forward to that video when it comes out. I think we'll be releasing this one and the next one at the same time. I'm also going to continue this beginner's guide series with a couple of other basics. Some of the things that I've found that new players have a tendency to get tripped up on when they're first starting playing role-playing games. I think I'm going to do an alignment video, and I'm going to do the basics of using magic as a magical casting character in the game. So look forward to both of those. I think that about does it for this video. Until the next time I see you, have more fun, would you? It's good for you.